Okay, well, as you can see, Rocky's having a good sleep there. I've already given him his first breakfast, so he's having his first nap after his first breakfast. He is. He seems to be pretty happy and contented. I've got the heat going. It's quite cold in here. It is. Anyway, yesterday I took a trip to Lanark, to the village of Lanark, which is north of Perth. And after that, I went across on the winding, hilly, narrow back roads where everybody still drives like a maniac for some reason, even though the roads aren't built for it, um, to visit Close's General Store on the Levant Mill Side Road. And anyway, Close's General Store closed up about 50 years ago. I remember when it was open. That's kind of my old stomping ground up there. I spent a lot of time around there when I was a kid. We used to picnic up there at Centennial Park, which is just down the road from Close's store. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a funny story about Close's store, though. Mrs. Close, now basically this couple that ran it, they were an older couple that ran it, and Mr. Close was a farmer, and Mrs. Close ran the store. Now the store had gas pumps, and it was just a general store, a small general store. They lived in the store. They had living quarters upstairs, which just consisted basically of a sitting room and a couple of bedrooms. And downstairs, they had the back part of the store walled off there, and they had a kitchen in the back. And that was their living quarters. Anyway, Mrs. Close used to do some baking for extra money. Mrs. Close liked money. She really liked money. And I think she was a product of the Depression, too, so maybe that affected her some. She had lived through that. I don't know, but a lot of people who lived through the Depression were quite traumatized, and it affected them in different ways. Look at him there. He's all arms and legs everywhere and a big fat stomach. Anyway, he's pretty cute. All full of wet food and treats, he is. And he's sleepy now. But anyway, Mrs. Close would do some pretty underhanded things for money. She used to cheat the kids out of their pop bottle money. But, you got to be pretty greedy to cheat a little kid out of 2 cents for a pop bottle. But she would do it. She was known to do things like that. Anyway, the story goes that all their money is buried somewhere on the property. I don't think it's ever been found. If it has been found, whoever found it never said anything anyway, but then really, would you say anything? I think that's why the interior of the store got gutted. I think that whoever did that was looking for the money, hoping that it might be in the walls of the store or something. But anyway, I don't know if they found anything or not, but I'm going to tell you kind of a comical story about Mrs. Close, and I'm sure that, most people would not find this story very. I'm sure she wouldn't find it. I'm sure she wouldn't find it too comical. But she's long dead now anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I'm sure the guy who she did this to didn't find it too comical either at the time. He might look back and laugh on it now if he's still alive, but he probably isn't either, If he is still alive, he'd be elderly now, and he could be, but anyway, I'll tell you the story. Mrs. Close did do some baking sometimes for people. and she made a little extra money doing that. And there was a man that was staying at a cottage not too far from the store, and he was working at some construction project. I think he was working on the roads or whatever. There was some road building project going on, and he was working at that, as far as I know. From what I recall of the story, that's what he was doing. So he was staying at this cottage in the summertime while he was working on his on this construction project. Well, he used to stop at the store quite often on his way past, and one day when he was in there, he was telling Mrs. Close. He was a bachelor. He didn't have a wife or anything, but he was telling Mrs. Close how much he missed his mother's raisin bread, and how great it was, that his mother used to bake this raisin bread, and it was just full of raisins. Like, it was just chock full of them, and it was really great anyway, and he really missed his mother's raisin bread. He hadn't had anything like that in a long time, and he really missed it. Well, Mrs. Close told him, she said, "I do some baking. I could bake you some raisin bread if you'd like." And the man, he thought that'd be a great idea, get some nice homemade raisin bread like Mom used to make. So she told him, she said, "Look, I'll charge you so many dollars, so much per loaf." It wouldn't have been dollars back then, it would have been cents. But she said, "I'll charge you so much per loaf, and you bring the ingredients. You bring me the ingredients, and I'll bake you up some raisin bread. And I'll just charge you so much a loaf for doing it." So he said, "That sounds like a good deal. We'll do that." The next day he came back to the store, and he had all the ingredients for the raisin bread. And he had got a great big bag of raisins, the biggest bag of raisins he could get, because he wanted those loaves to be chocked full of raisins, just like the raisin bread his mother used to make. So he left all that with Mrs. Close, and he told her, and she told him, she said, "Okay," she said, "come back in a few days, and I'll have your loaves for you." So a few days later, he came back. She had his loaves all baked for him. He paid her. He was all excited because he was going to have some raisin bread just like his mom used to make. And anyway, he was really happy about it. So he paid her for the loaves, and he took them away. Well, now, here's where the story gets interesting. A few days later, that man was back up at the store, and he was not happy. And he was in there really berating Mrs. Close, just really ripping a strip off her, just verbally annihilating her. And the reason for that was what had happened. What basically, she had shortchanged him, is what she had done. She had kept most of the raisins for herself, and she hadn't put very many raisins into the raisin bread. And with that big bag of raisins he bought, those loaves should have been full of raisins, just like his mom used to do when he was a kid. Anyway, he was in there, and he had one of the loaves of bread in his hand, and he's holding the loaf up in her face, basically, in Mrs. Close's face. And she's trying to tell him that there's lots of raisins in there. She didn't know what he was talking about. She'd put all the raisins into the bread like she was supposed to, which she hadn't. She was lying. But still, that was her story, and she was sticking to it. And he's holding up this loaf of bread in front of her face with one hand, and he's pointing at it with the other. And he's saying, I defy you to show me one goddamn raisin in one of these loaves of bread. He said, I just defy you to show me one raisin in one of these loaves of bread. He said, you'll be very lucky to find a raisin in here. He said, you know. So that was the story anyway. The guy was pretty bad at her. I doubt he ever stopped at the store again. But, yeah, she'd do things like that. And, I had a friend who's passed away now, but she was the niece of these people. And she told me one time that her uncle had told her that all their money was buried on the farm, and that where it was, nobody would ever find it. But again, these people were products of the Depression, and one thing that people who survived the Depression learned through that experience was not to trust the banks. And that's why I remember when I was a kid, a lot of old people did things like that. They had money hidden in their house, and they had money buried in the yard, and all sorts of things. A friend of mine was telling me one time he was at his grandmother's house, and he had to get a towel out of a linen closet upstairs in his grandmother's house. And when he went into the closet to get the towel, at the back of the closet, he said, there was it was like one of those big glass restaurant-sized jars that pickles or mayonnaise would come in, or mustard or whatever. The great big huge glass jar. And it was full of money. Like, I'm not talking coins, I'm talking like full of paper money. And he remembered seeing that in there. And then when she passed away, that disappeared. So somebody got that. Anyway, he never knew who got it, but somebody got it. And that wasn't unusual back then, that older people did that, because going through the Depression did quite a number on them anyway. And they really didn't trust banks. And honestly, I think we're about to have a moment like that again. I think we are about to become a generation that doesn't trust banks. I really do. I think that is coming for us. And I think right now what's happening is everything is being kept up artificially. And basically, I think the economy is on life support. But that can only go on for so long before you got to pull the plug. And that is going to happen. So anyway, and a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money, because what's going to happen is the banks are going to seize your money. When you put your money in the bank, it's no longer yours. It actually becomes the bank's money. And the bank can do what it wants with it. And so, yeah, it's, like I say, people right now are a little too trusting of institutions. But that is about to change, because there's going to be a lot of people suffer a lot of trauma when this thing finally just crashes, which it's going to do. We've been careening down the mountain with no brakes for quite a while. And, we're about to go through the guardrail, basically. That's what's about to happen. And it's going to be a traumatic thing for a lot of people. And if you have money in the bank, it's going to disappear. It happened in the 1930s, and it'll happen again. History does repeat itself, unfortunately. But anyway, that's just a story about Mrs. Close and the raisin bread, and how her and her husband had money buried on the property. And like I say, as far as I know, it's never been found. So somewhere on that property, there's a cache of money. Anyway, That property extends fairly far back because it was a farm. They lived there in the store, but her husband farmed that property. So it goes back quite a piece anyway. All right, that's it for now. We'll talk to you later. And good morning. Good morning, by the way. Bye bye.